right now in your seat, and just do this whole exercise in your head, please. Don't yell anything out. To think of a number between 1 and 10. Everyone have a number? Okay. Multiply the number by 9. Here's where we start doing some math. Everyone have a number? If your number is 1 digit, leave it alone. If your number is 2 digits, add those 2 digits together. We good? All right. Subtract 5. Okay? Everyone's still with me? Okay. Take that number and find the corresponding letter of the alphabet. So if you have 1, it would be A, 2 would be B, 3 would be C, etc. So everyone should have a letter. Good? Okay. Now think of a country that starts with that letter. First country that comes to mind. Everyone have a country? Take the second letter of that country and think of an animal that starts with that letter. Country and animal, okay? And finally, a color associated with that animal. So you should have a country, a color, and an animal. How many of you had this guy?
I had that.
Show of hands. I want everyone to raise your hands who has this guy.
I did have that.
Okay, good. That looks roughly to be about 2/3 of you. And the funny thing about this is, this illustrates what we do for a living. I don't know anything about any of you in this room. I don't know you from a hole in the wall. Actually, that's not true. There are probably 3 or 4 of you in this room I do know fairly well.
And they're the 2 that did not raise their hands for Gray Elephant from Denmark.
Yeah, so I'm interested in what you guys got, but I don't know really anything about any of you, yet I know with pretty good certainty that the vast majority of you, no matter what audience we talk to, are going to say Gray Elephant from Denmark. So, show of hands, who got something different? What'd you get?
A few of you.
An orange orangutan from the Dominican Republic. 1 or 2 more. Who else got something else? What'd you get? A gray elephant from Deutschland. Wow, that was, you actually backed into most of the right answer there. That was good. And maybe 1 more. What did you get? An American brown moose. Okay, so that's
so we know
that's
there's
a
some
math
fuzzy
problem.
math
Yeah.
in this audience, which is fine. It's not like you're a group of accountants or anything, so we'll let you off the hook.
Yeah, we do this, that's right, we do this in rooms with accountants and folks who actually need to do math for a living, and when several of them bungle this, it just becomes, someone ends up getting put on the spot like that, so we're very sorry about that. So the fact of the matter is that this is how the world works. Again, we know very little about any of you, yet we knew that most of you were going to say Gray Elephant from Denmark, and now we have this wonderful vista behind us. I don't really know where that came from. But
this is what we do. We're also mountain climbers.
Yeah. So the world works that way. When we study trends, we understand that it's all about pattern recognition and understanding where the sort of mass of data is pointing. So we understand where the world is moving directionally, but we also understand that even if something is pointing towards a very powerful trend, that there are often equal counter trends that are sometimes the direct result of those trends or sort of rise in a complementary manner. So all of the other answers that you guys got, barring a math error, are equally valid. It's just that human behavior generally leads into one bucket. So again, that's sort of what we do as futurists. Pattern recognition, studying trends. There's no magic involved. People actually will ask us if we do all of these things, including use a crystal ball. You would be surprised how many serious clients of ours actually ask us if we use techniques like this. So what we're going to do for the next roughly half an hour is give you a crash course into where the future is going. We're going to talk about a framework we use to help contextualize a lot of what we see. And just as a quick side note before we begin, Erica and I, along with being colleagues, are also married.
That's why we're standing so far apart.
Like, we're way on the opposite sides of the room from each other. And we also work with my mother. So I spend every day with my wife and my mother. So I am heavily medicated right now, and it's early in the morning. So if I start dozing off, that's what's happening here.
So it's no wonder he has no hair. So we are going to do a couple things today, as Jared said. One of the things that we're going to do is walk you through our framework for where the economy is moving, and then we're going to go through some of the major growth areas that we see on the horizon and talk about what it's going to mean for all of you in the audience today. So before we go too far forward into the future, I just want to spend a few minutes rewinding and setting the historical context so that we understand why we are where we are and what set up that path. So I want to rewind back to around 2008. And I'm sure all of you can imagine, time and time again, the question that we kept getting from all of our clients, which obviously was, when is the global recession going to end? And we said that it was a question that could not be answered, not because we didn't have the answer to it, but rather because it was not just a recession. Yes, in some ways it was, but it was also indicative of something far greater. And what it was indicative of was the fact that we are undergoing and have been undergoing a profound and radical economic transformation on a global scale. And it's similar to other economic transitions that we've seen throughout history. So as you can see on the timeline here, we went from the agricultural economy to the industrial, to the post-industrial, into what in our shop we were calling the immotile economy. Other economists were calling it the knowledge economy or the information economy. We, of course, as futurists, we are also in the business of making up words. This is one of the words that we have made up. I'm not going to get into why we call it the immotile for now, but just as a side note, we're going to be throwing a lot of vocabulary out at you guys because our belief is that in order to really understand where the future is moving, you can't get saddled with existing or outdated vocabulary, so we make up our own. So after the immotile, we're now moving into this new transition. So what's happening here? When you look at this timeline, there are three major takeaways, or at least three major takeaways that we saw when we looked at this kind of historical trajectory here. The first is the confluence of disruptive technologies at each transition. So for instance, that which a company used to make money on, that technology, the company can no longer make money on it anymore. So when you look at, let's say, the immotile economy and what a company used to make money on, which was cell phones and the hardware, that became more commoditized. Money dropped to the bottom line. So cell phone manufacturers had to migrate up to that next higher order value proposition to court the consumer. So they had to make money in new ways. They had to make money whether it was in the adjacencies, the apps, the software, the warranties, all of those things. And the other thing that we're seeing is that new areas of employment are opening up entirely new vistas. So we always talk about the fact that many people with each economic transition are being thrust out of work. And while that's true, they're not going to be employed or re-employed in the old ways. They're going to be employed and re-employed in completely new ways. So that's number one. Number two is the fact that economies do not replace each other, rather they are layered on top of each other. So what do I mean by this? At least here in the United States, a small portion of our workforce is still employed within the agricultural sector. But we are no longer an agricultural society because we don't aggregate around the land in a way that we once did. And the same is true when we go from other economies. The industrial, a portion of our workforce is still employed there, and so on and so forth. So it has a layering effect. The third point, and perhaps the most important for our purposes today, is this whole element of time. And when you look here, what do you see happening? You see the compression of time. We went from thousands of years to hundreds to just mere decades to now just even a matter of years. So we see time as a construct going from something that once happened at a more geometric rate to something that is now happening at an exponential rate. We see the exponential rate of change coupled with the exponential rate of technological change. And that is really profound. So in order to frame and contextualize really where this economy was going, we asked ourselves three questions. One, where are jobs being created? Two, where is disposable income going? And three, what is the MO, the modus operandi, basically what is driving this new economy? And in answering the first two, we said it was all about altered dimensionality, and that dimension is space. And in answering the last question, we said it was all about boundarylessness. Now, I know that sounds very conceptual and very amorphous, but as such, we called it the Metaspace Economy, and we identified 10 major growth areas. And all of these are going to shape, inform, and influence the future of advertising and really the future of all industries and businesses across the board. So we don't have time to go through all 10, but we are going to go through 4 of them with you today. And what I was talking about with altered dimensionality, it will become clearer to you as we go through each.
So we selected these 4 because we thought in a limited amount of time they would have a lot of direct application to what it is that all of you do. So before I dive into the first one, we're going to do one more very quick interactive exercise. If I were to define a luxury in basic economic terms as something which is in extremely high demand but very short supply, What's the #1 luxury in all of your lives today? What do you need a lot more of and you simply do not have enough of? Yell it out louder. Come on. Time. All right, that was good. Unanimous. It usually is unanimous. Time is the answer to that question. It's a universal construct that people need more time and they don't have enough of it. Once in a while, someone will say money, which is equally valid, I suppose, and people come up with some even more creative answers, especially if they're yelling them out from the back of the room. But time is the answer that we're looking for. And so the first growth area of the Metaspace economy that we always lead with is what's called time space. Time is the #1 luxury value proposition, and it really is becoming the #1 overall value proposition today for whatever you do, for whoever you're doing it for, whether it's consumers, employees, it doesn't even matter. So as Erica mentioned, time is not just happening at a geometric rate, it's happening at an exponentially accelerated rate. And this also starts to blend into some really wacky quantum physical kind of stuff that people have been saying for a long time. We say that time is not linear anymore, but that time is actually sequential. Not sequential, excuse me, simultaneous. It's simultaneous. People are doing more things at once than ever before. People are living multiple lives at one time. If you know anybody who has a presence in a virtual environment or is in an online gaming platform, some people have several avatars at once and they live several lives at once. We also multitask more than ever before. Research suggests that we are actually not as good at multitasking as we think we are, but we are multitasking and doing more things than ever before. So time is actually getting layered on top of itself. It is not linear. It is not A, B, C, D. It is A, B, C, and D all at the same time. This is critical. As Erica mentioned, we make up a lot of our own language. So you're going to hear a few terms over the next 20 minutes that you've never heard before. This is one of them, templosion. And this essentially means what it sounds like. It is the implosion of really large things into really small time. So let's talk about some very quick examples. Let's talk about two things that are sort of the opposite happening together. We see large companies that seemed previously invincible essentially dying out overnight because of how quickly they're being disrupted and disintermediated. Erica's from Rochester, New York. We both went to school in Rochester. That's where we originally met. When I got up there originally 20 years ago, that community was still founded on a few very large companies, including Kodak. And Kodak at the time still seemed like a world leader and sort of seemed impervious to a lot of things happening around it. And where does Kodak sit today in 2015? Kodak is a cautionary tale, and it is not the only one. There are dozens upon dozens of examples of huge companies that have fallen very, very quickly, a lot of them in retail, but certainly cross-category. And at the same time, if you look a little bit farther down on this slide here, we think about the rise of startups. You think about companies that have fewer than 10 employees with no clearly stated monetization strategy, and they're getting valuations in the market sometimes that exceed $1 billion. Now, we can call that a bubble, but the fact is we see tiny companies disrupting out of nowhere and large companies falling more quickly than ever before. And templosion is impacting all of the things you see here. We are seeing abbreviated R&D and planning cycles in all sectors. Our job as futurists is actually becoming a lot harder because when we go in and talk to management at companies and try to get them to think 20 years out, they're only thinking 1, 2, 3 years out because of this concept of templosion. People want results right now, and because we see shrinking executive tenure, a lot of people don't even know if they're going to be at their company in 5 years. So why should they think about something that might impact their business 10 years out, 20 years out? It's a challenge, but it's all within this concept of templosion. We obviously see rapid product iteration and versioning, particularly with technology. We know this from the things we hold in our hands. These things are coming out with new versions every few months. If you live in other parts of the world, they're coming out with new versions, in some cases, every few weeks. So this is the world we live in. And it's also happening with communication. You think about the linear relationship we've had pretty much throughout history, that the more sophisticated a civilization or society became, the more voluminous our communication, both written and spoken, became. And that started to fray only about 20 years ago. With the mass commercialization of the internet, you had the blogosphere, and people started to, quote unquote, curate what they put out there. They started to abbreviate what they put out there. But then, of course, within the last 10 years, we entered the microblogosphere, which Twitter sort of is the real herald of. And the fact of the matter is that the microblogosphere, in limiting us to a certain amount of characters, is a time value proposition because it takes less time to transmit a message, less time to receive a message. So we are so busy now that we just want to get the gist of it very quickly. We don't want to have to read an entire thing. But the funny thing about it is that that's just the beginning, because we are now moving towards a world of image and short video-based communication. characterized by platforms, for example, like Instagram, Pinterest, Vine, the list goes on and on and on. And this isn't trivial, it's happening because of time. It's happening because a picture literally can tell 1,000 words. Not to mention the fact that pictures and now emoji and symbols are truly universal. So even though people might interpret pictures a little bit differently from one another, the fact of the matter is I can connect on Instagram with someone who lives halfway around the world, and we may not speak the same language, but it doesn't matter anymore. Ultimately, this is a time value proposition, and it is changing the way we communicate across sector in every area of life.
So another way we see Templosion being manifested is through generational compression. So just like what we keep saying about the exponential rate of change, that also needs to be applied within a generational lens. So the way in which we segment generations currently, we would argue is completely inadequate for the world into which we are moving. So how do we segment them now? We have the baby boomers who were born anywhere from around 46 to 65, Gen X, which is from that point to about 1980, Gen Y, millennials, which is from about 1980 to about 1996, 98. Even these are, huge age chunks, huge cohorts that we have segmented the population into. But when things speed up, we would argue that generations now need to be defined not in 10, 12, 15-year increments, but rather every 2 to 3 years. Market researchers, advertisers, marketers, how do you get your heads around a generation where the boundaries are only 2, 3 years apart? So the other thing is the way we segment the generations, the names that we give them, they don't mean anything. They're basically links in a sequence. We had X, we had Y. Now, all right, we'll have Z. That makes sense. It's just alphabetical. But rather, we need to really understand psychographically, too, what makes these generations tick. So many people recently have been focusing so much on millennials. So many advertisers are trying to get inside the millennial mind. Millennial marketing is such a hot button topic. But rather, we want to shift the focus less to millennials and more to what's coming up behind them. Many people refer to them as Gen Z. Of course, we have a new name for them. We call them cybrids. And those are the ones that are 18 and younger. And we call them cybrids. They are cyber hybrids. And it's not to evoke a very sci-fi notion of cyborgs, but we call them cybrids because they are the first generation in history to have a truly symbiotic relationship with the technology that surrounds them. So much so, and we're going to touch on this in a little bit, that it is actually creating physical differences in the brain. So let's just tick off some of the characteristics that really define this new generation. We see a group that is well-educated, but yet they place less value on the traditional value of higher education. They have learned the lessons of many millennials who are saddled with debt, and many of these Gen Zers want to create their own path or are interested in these new alternative forms, even like what Peter Thiel is creating to basically hack education. They are very industrious, they are collaborative, they are highly entrepreneurial, which also is in stark contrast to a lot of people's perceptions of millennials. We read last year that the 24-year-olds in the millennial generation, who are now 25 today, were the least entrepreneurial cohort since World War II. So we oftentimes assume that a lot of millennials are creating their own businesses. In fact, they are very risk averse, and we may see a sea change when that comes to cybrids. They are community oriented, they are financially prudent, again, learning the lessons of their underemployed and unemployed older cohorts, and they're eager to build a better planet. They're more tolerant than millennials of demographic diversity. They are less likely to subscribe to traditional gender roles. They have decreased brand loyalty. This should be no surprise to anyone in the room. And they have shifting purchasing habits. And it's interesting because things that millennials would typically buy, whether it was clothing or other sorts of consumables, cybrids are less interested in that. They have, in the country, $44 billion worth of spending power, and they're spending it on things like food and drink, and even things that are buoying the collaborative economy, which we don't have time to talk about today. They also, as I said, they have increased spending power, but increasingly they are more frugal. Again, they've learned the lessons, they lived through the recession, they get it, they see it. They expect the brands they interface with to use sophisticated technology, but, and this is important, they do not want to be tracked and they want to retain control over their data. Because they have that symbiotic relationship, they are so savvy, so aware, and they are demanding that those brands that they interface with be fully transparent about how they use their data, what they're doing with it, and how it impacts them.
So the second growth area we're going to talk about briefly is called cyberspace. And this is not traditional cyberspace as we think about it. This goes well beyond the internet itself. We're going to talk about a few key components of it today that sort of integrate together to inform the future. The first is what's happening with virtual reality, or VR. So quick show of hands, how many people in this room have at least once had an experience with one of the sort of common VR headsets that's out today, whether it's an Oculus Rift or Google Cardboard? So that's what I figured, so a good majority of you. Sometimes when we ask audiences that, there are very few who've actually had the experience. So we don't have to go so much into sort of what it feels like. But ultimately, what virtual reality, the promise of virtual reality really is, and we are not there yet. We're still at a very rudimentary level here, but we are moving towards this future. Virtual reality, we say in our shop, is the ability to trick the brain into thinking it is somewhere else, doing something else in real time. And ultimately, the real ability to do that is going to be when we are able to effectively replicate and synthesize all 5 senses. And so right now, we're making huge progress when it comes to visual and auditory, but it's not, we're a ways away from being able to effectively replicate the sense of smell, for example, which is most closely tied to memory and experience, and there are still difficulties with haptics. But if you think about where we are today, we have all of these different applications that are coming out into the marketplace, really, really interesting, and they are changing the world. They are affecting everything from shopping and product testing and prototyping, but most interestingly for our purposes today, they are really, really fundamentally changing the future of 2 things: experience, consumer experience, and the future of narrative or storytelling. So you think about experience, and you think about retailers, for example, like Tommy Hilfiger, that are starting to explore the idea of letting people participate in virtual runway shows to see the newest fashions, or what Marriott is doing with these sort of teleporter devices, where newlyweds can basically go on a virtual honeymoon and they can sample Hawaii, for example, just by stepping into one of those booths. We have a picture of it here. But you also think about what's happening with storytelling and narrative. I was on a panel last week at a media event which focused just on this, and the idea that you look at what the New York Times is doing right now, or what InStyle is doing, the idea that narrative can be reshaped by virtual reality, and we can increase empathy and increase certain types of responses we want from people based on having them actually go through a virtual experience. It's really fascinating. So virtual reality is fundamentally changing the way we communicate with people.
Oh, so another part of this is obviously augmented reality, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with a lot of things happening there. When you talk about the nearer term future, we came across a stat recently. In 2020, it is expected that the AR plus VR market is going to be worth $150 billion, with AR representing $120 billion of that.
And just real quick, does everyone, I mean, I'm assuming in this audience, most of you know this, but does everyone know the fundamental difference between virtual reality and augmented reality? Right, the fact that virtual reality really is creating an alternative reality to the real world that we're all sort of in right now. Augmented reality is an overlay over that world that sort of enhances it and gives us additional information.
And the way that it's designed right now is VR is very much a closed experience. It's an individual experience, where this is more about having the real world or your environment come to life by that virtual overlay, whether it's through your cell phone or whether it's through some sort of wearable like the Google Glass, which we obviously know has gone back to the drawing board. But AR is really transforming the whole shopping experience. It's transforming the whole print advertising experience. And there are some companies that are really getting it right. A lot of car manufacturers are augmenting their print ads using AR. Hold your phone up to the magazine ad and it will make the car come to life. Tesco, the British supermarket chain, is doing the same. You hold your phone up and the advertisement comes up and you can interface with it by accessing recipes, a virtual store. Pepsi even did this in London, where they turned the whole experience of waiting for a bus, which is obviously a very boring one. They turned it into a time value proposition where their billboard then became augmented, where you look through it and you could see flying UFOs and zombies, and it became a really cool experience for people who were obviously just sitting there waiting. So we see a lot of different applications of AR. We also see this being married, as I said, with what's happening with wearables. So we're going to see this obviously transforming both the in-store, the shopping experience, and increasingly how advertisements are sold to us, marketed to us. The two things that we are not going to have time to cover under cyberspace, but I definitely want to mention, is everything happening with mobile payments. So we know how that is changing the landscape, especially here in the US, where in many ways we are laggards when it comes to that compared to the rest of the world. And also everything that's happening with alternative digital and virtual currency, Bitcoin just being the first iteration. We're hearing more about the blockchain, which is the technology that supports it, but also all of the different iterations that it will obviously spawn and has spawned in the future.
Third quick area we're going to cover is called PlaySpace. And PlaySpace has a few fundamental areas. The first is gamification. Gamification is a term, again, that I would assume most of you are familiar with. You know, the real definition of gamification is very simple. It's the application of game or gaming mechanics to a traditionally non-game setting. So we always say that it's making the serious more fun, even in ways that are not necessarily transparent or conscious to the consumer. And this has been, you know, sort of in the marketing purview for a long time when you think about points and loyalty programs and frequent flyer miles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But gamification is now sort of pervasive in everything that we do and see. It's pervasive in training and learning in the workplace. And so gamification principles are becoming sort of ubiquitous. We also talk about something called board games. And it's the idea that when you think about advertising or marketing or anything where you have to command people's attention, we're actually moving away from a focus on attention to combating boredom. There are actually universities now that have formal fields of study around boredom. They call it boredom studies, and they do research into how from childhood all the way up to adulthood we can combat boredom in a world where there is all this stimulation, you know, coming at us from 1,000 different directions. Adult play is something you're going to hear a lot more about. The idea that, you know, it's coached out of us after we grow up, that we can no longer play in an unfettered, free, whimsical, creative way. But we're seeing more examples now of companies that are allowing their workers to play in a very whimsical sort of creative way, and it's leading to interesting outcomes. We see municipalities around the world, cities, putting in things that look like jungle gyms that are actually installations meant for adults to climb and to sort of explore and experience, and it's leading to higher quality of life ratings. So adult play is really interesting. Everything happening with gaming is hugely disruptive. We now see video game tourism, and we even see a booming field of virtual photographers that are chronicling these vast, massively multiplayer online gaming worlds, which is fascinating. So you're talking about another new realm for marketing that hasn't even really been touched or explored. And then obviously at the bottom here, how many of you, show of hands, are familiar with what's happening in the world of esports? Okay, so esports is interesting. It's not just competitive video gaming. It's competitive video gaming as a spectator sport. So if any of you have heard of Twitch, Twitch is something that a lot of people still are not familiar with. It was purchased last year by Amazon for just short of $1 billion, and we think they got a good deal on it. The fact is, Twitch last year took up the 4th highest amount of bandwidth during peak internet traffic hours in the United States. It is a streaming platform, a live streaming platform where video gamers compete against each other and are essentially celebrities and have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people following them and their every move. So you're talking about an entirely new marketing ecosystem that we haven't touched. And I think as a real sports fan, that this ecosystem is going to be richer than professional real sports are within the next 10 years. So if you haven't done a lot of research into it, look up esports and what's happening with Twitch and competitive video gaming.
So the last growth area we're going to cover is what we call inner space. And inner space is essentially the understanding of the human mind, the human brain, and what makes us tick. And what this is really leading to is the neurification of everything. It's neuro as a prefix for neurofinance, neuromarketing, neuroadvertising, neuro everything. And we're seeing a lot of companies experiment in this space. When it comes to, obviously, the understanding of sensory systems, we're learning more about what attaches to the brain, how sensory stimuli affect us. We also see generational differences. I had talked about how cybrids were the first generation literally to be rewired. So how we market to them and how we market directly to their brains is going to be a growing field of study. And as I said, the neurification of everything. We see a lot of companies using things such as facial recognition, even gait detection, understanding the body and posture and movement, iris scanning, heartbeat recognition, and sentiment emotion analysis. In fact, Coke and Unilever were two companies to use emotion analysis to really understand what resonated in the brains of their consumers, why, how that manifested to purchasing decisions, and also physiological and biometric data, understanding heart rates, skin conductivity. Obviously, there are huge privacy and security ramifications with all of this, but I would argue, just like with a lot of the technologies we talked about, when it comes to the neurification and neuroadvertising, we are just at the precipice. And obviously, it will be opt-in, but this is really going to turn traditional market research on its head. We read a study recently where the whole issue of pricing dynamics is also going to change. Using fMRI, when people were asked which wine they preferred and they knew the price, they automatically went and preferred the higher priced wine. With fMRI, we are able to understand the placebo effect and the effect that that also has not only on purchasing decisions, but how we advertise to people. So we want to introduce one last concept to you guys here today. And we talked about a lot of exciting opportunities, a lot of things that you guys are already probably looking at and familiar with. But with every opportunity comes a challenge. And here are some of the challenges on the horizon. The first is the rising prevalence of ad blockers. Again, I'm sure something that all of you are looking at. This is not only happening online, but people increasingly want to block those advertisements from coming at them through their mobile phones. We see about 200 million people here in the US using ad blockers. So how to work around them, penetrate them, permeate them is going to be a big challenge. Obviously, generational shifts, and we talked about those. And also competition for talent. When we see more technology morphing and influencing every sector and every industry, and particularly yours, there's going to be competition for talent with tech firms. And also with these new media juggernauts, these big new means of distribution and all of the new distribution channels that they're going to spawn, and how to navigate those is also going to be a challenge in this new horizon.
Yeah, so like any industry, advertising, like any industry we talk to, you guys face challenges going into the future. You know those, you're aware of them. So what are some of the opportunities? And this is sort of a catch-all for everything we covered, and this is our little summary. So we come up with this word, just like we come up with all of these other terms, and we call it augvertising. And it really is the future. And this is really a response to everything happening out there in the marketplace. And augvertising, we like to say, is omni-channel on steroids. You got all these events where everyone talks about omni-channel. We talk about mobile, we talk about online, we talk about at retail, we talk about TV, broadcast, print, etc. The future of omni-channel is really going to be the combination of the things we just talked about, and it's happening today. It's augmented reality, virtual reality, the Internet of Things, which we did not go into today, wearables, plus, iterations of these technologies we haven't even envisioned yet. That's the future of omni-channel and communications. And it really is the integration of all of this new technology, everything happening with gaming, and everything we're learning about the human brain. Really fundamental, and it's changing the way we deliver all of this messaging. And it's also radically shifting the nature of celebrity. This is critical. We have digital video content creators that are wildly popular, and what we call e-fleets. These are the people who are competing in esports. So they're not traditional athletes. It's not like LeBron. These are people who are getting famous because they're good at video games. And there were 20,000 people filling up arenas to watch them play video games. So the fact of the matter is, I saw something a couple of weeks ago that chronicled who the 30 most popular or recognizable people were to Generation Z or cybrids. And I only recognized 12 of the 30 people. I felt like such an old man. I am 36 years old. I had no idea what I was looking at. And then they broke it down and said that 4 of them were movie stars, 4 or 5 of them were TV stars. I think half of them fell into these 2 categories: digital video content creators and e-fleets. These are the people that are going to be influencing behavior. These are the people that are going to be making decisions. And then finally, we have a few other possible hot augvertising related jobs of the near future. These are just ideas we throw out. These are 4 of among probably hundreds of new types of jobs and responsibilities we might see. It includes e-fleet and digital video talent agents, VR experience designers, some of which exist today, neuro-augmentation and implant technicians and developers, for everything Erica was talking about with Interspace, and real-time MRI scanners and interpreters.
So clearly, when we look at this as a whole, we are seeing customized and personalized advertising like nothing before. And just like what Jared was talking about earlier, when he was mentioning attention, it is not just attention, but it's also about combating boredom. So understanding both is going to be critical. Now, just to leave you on this note, we love this quote, and it's funny, we presented to a group of a few hundred lawyers a couple weeks ago, and they did their due diligence and came back and said, we don't know if Henry Ford exactly said this, so you might need to put attributed to. So to any of the lawyers out there, this quote is attributed to Henry Ford, but he said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And we love this quote because it really illustrates the difference between innovation and imagination. Oftentimes we think of innovation as being so disruptive, but rather what it becomes is either straight line extrapolation or just cliche terms like thinking outside the box, where innovation for these people would have been faster horses. But true imagination and true disruptive thinking is the car. That is seeing the future with a new set of eyes and seeing things completely differently. So when we talk about all of these things, the future of advertising and all of these growth areas for the future, just see it as the car. See it as pure imagination and a vista where you can really create anything that you want.
Yeah, I mean, if the world were created today and you were plopped down into it and you were tasked with envisioning the way you wanted things to look and what you wanted to do, what would that look like? That mandate is the same for people who are trying to, quote unquote, innovate in any industry. You don't want to just come up with the next version of, because that is what everyone else is doing. You want to truly be innovative in your space, you have to understand where the future is moving. You have to sort of go where the puck is moving, not where it has been, the difference between innovation and imagination. So I know we went a few minutes over. We tried to cover as much as we could in a very limited amount of time. Believe me, we can take that and blow it out into a 3 or 4 hour module, and you do not want to hear us talk for 3 or 4 hours. So thank you guys for listening to us this morning. I know we were first up, so we do have a contact slide actually. If anyone wants to follow up with us and get any more information about any of the stuff we talked about today. But thank you guys for being here and listening to us.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and thank you, Chick.